I had just left the church on Thursday evening. I was on my way home from a meeting, of course. I was headed up Green Tree Road towards the church parsonage when the traffic came to a complete standstill. I looked to the right and I saw a doe. She was so close, I almost hit her. I wondered what was up. I looked on ahead and I saw a young woman on the side of the road on her phone sobbing for all she was worth. As my car crept a little closer, I saw what had happened. She had hit baby. And somehow, in a physical and probably an emotional strength that was much too much for a young girl, either she or a bystander who was a much better person than I pulled the baby over to the side of the road. The fawn was lifeless. Up ahead was a buck, pacing, looking determined. And all of a sudden, I was a kid back in Marion, Virginia. My eyes welled up with tears, and I remembered when we had come home from our vacation. We lived out in the country where dogs could run free, and Barney, our cockapoo, saw us pulling the driveway, and he came bounding across the road, determined to see us right in front of a car, who ran right over him right in front of my eyes. The men could hear my wailing inside the house, and my parents told me, please, stop. I couldn't contain myself. He offered continual I'm sorries. He offered to pay. There was nothing that he could do. I wanted my dog, and he wanted my pain to stop. I wanted my pain to stop. I was the kid who was forbidden to watch any Disney movie that had any animals in it that had the chance of being harmed, much especially being killed. Literally forbidden. True story. Obviously, if you're a hunter, I apologize to you in advance. I could never bring myself to take the life of an animal. I couldn't do it. I recognize the value. I recognize there's food. I recognize it's sport. I could never do it. When I arrived home Thursday evening, I was crying, and Gary, being the man that he is, let me sit with him for probably half an hour and process. I hadn't cried like that so deeply in a long time. And I wondered what that was about. Yes, it was for the fawn. Yes, it was for thinking, how do deer respond when they lose a baby? What would their Thursday night be like without the baby? I've sat with plenty of parishioners. Fortunately, I shouldn't say plenty, but several parishioners who have lost their babies or their children. I don't know how they face the next nights. But I've been doing this ministry gig long enough that I had some understanding of what the tears were about. They were for the fawn, yes, but they were also for my own pets waiting for me at home that I knew one day I wouldn't have forever. They were for my past losses, like Barney the cockapoo, that my mind raced back to. They were for losses that I've had in life in general. Losses, grief, times of mourning. They were for some of your losses. Folks keep dying, and I keep offering comfort and love in the midst of their grieving. That's a part of life in the church. I mourn for you as well. And then I mourn for the other things that you have named to me in confidence that are losses that you have struggled with. Whether it's loss of health, or memory or mobility, a loss of your youthfulness that you're having a hard time adjusting to, a loss of a career, a relationship, a betrayal, a loss of meaning and purpose. Loss is loss. And I think that any time we cry as adults, that we've gotten sophisticated enough that we save up our tears and try to process too many things in one sitting. Do you do that? Sometimes we probably don't cry enough, because when we do, it all comes out and we're not sure what we're crying about. But whatever loss is before us, wittingly or unwittingly, we will enter an experience of transition. That's what we've been talking about the past couple of weeks. where we will try to make sense of whatever that loss is that we've experienced, where we will try to find a way to integrate that into our life and make sense of it. I would call any of those losses grieving, mourning, a grief process. And there are clearly some ways that are better to grieve than others. At the premise of today's sermon is this, that there are both healthy and unhealthy ways in which we can grieve all of the losses that we experience. And that when we understand that three-stage process of an ending, a neutral zone, and a new beginning, then we can come out of those losses healthier people, more wholesome. People who learn how to do grief well, how to do death well. As we look at today's text a little closer, specifically looking at those last two verses that Jeff read for you, Paul had something that ended, a great something that ended that day that he was on the road to Damascus, breathing threats of murder, with orders in his hands from the high priest. He had gone and procured a notarized form where he could go to Damascus and he could take all the Christians out. You see, Paul was a stalwart Jew. He was trained by the best of Jewish leaders, Gamaliel, one of the best of his time. He was all about the Jewish cause, and he was going to take out anyone who stood against it, most especially those followers of the way, the Christians. And so off to Damascus he heads. When he's knocked off of his ride, a great light comes from heaven, and then a voice says to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he says as a title of honor, Lord, who are you? I'm Jesus, who you're persecuting. Now we're told that those around him heard the voice also, but they didn't see him. They didn't see anything. And they did as the voice commanded them. They took Paul by the hands and they led him into Damascus. And they took him to the street called Straight, which I find extremely humorous, because this man really needed straightening out. To the house of one Judas. I looked for information on Judas, don't have much information on Judas, where he sat in that house blind for 3 days and didn't eat and didn't drink. In the William Bridge book that we've been using as a basis along with scripture for the study, the Transitions book, he would say that something did end for Paul on that day. And he would forever refer to it throughout his writings to his churches as a turning point in his life. He talked about that Damascus Road experience not once, but twice, but 3 different times in Scripture. The day he entered what became an unhinged life or a neutral zone, a place he had never been before. I want you to try to imagine with me what those 3 days might have been like for Paul. We're not told. Imagine if this had happened to you. How would you sit with that? Those days were probably never ending, like eternity. They were probably confusing, frightening, maybe harrowing as he tried to imagine what next. Gut-wrenching as he was hungering and thirsting. Sleep deprivating. Maybe even hallucinating from life or sleep. Maybe catastrophizing as he tried to imagine, oh my God, what awaits me? What awaits me? Maybe lonely. We're not told that anyone was with him. Disoriented. He sat in maybe what he understood as a hell. I want you to think about some of your own abrupt changes or griefs or losses, and tell me what are some of the words that you've experienced. What are some of the adjectives that would describe what you've experienced in those places? Fear. Anger. Thank you for saying that. I hadn't listed it. Perfect. What is this, God? Depression. Yes.
The search for something to stay connected.
A search for something to keep you connected in the midst of, what is this? Guilt. Anxiety. If you've never had an anxiety attack, folks, Yes.
Actual physical heartache.
A physical heartache. Yeah. One of the things I love so much about Scripture is when you're given stories like this, try to imagine what's not said as much as what's said. It makes the person more real to you. In the 16th century, there lived a Spanish mystic, poet, a Carmelite priest, and Roman Catholic doctor of the Church, a venerated saint known as Saint John of the Cross. You may know him for his famous poem, The Dark Night, or as we call it, The Dark Night of the Soul. It's an 8-stanza poem with 5 lines each, and he narrates the journey of the soul out of itself to connect to God, who is unknown and who we have a distance to travel to. He talks about the different nights of the soul where we have to go through purification in order to be united with God the Divine. Some of the words of that poem: in an obscure night, fevered with love's anxiety, love for God. Oh, hapless, happy plight, I went, none seeing me, forth from my house where all things quiet be. I lost myself, forgot myself. I lay my face against the beloved's face. Everything fell away, and I left myself behind, abandoning my cares among the lilies, forgotten. In Roman Catholic spirituality, they have built on that dark night of the soul, and it has become, for the Catholics, a time of spiritual dryness or spiritual crisis. A journey where we feel disconnected from everything and we long for connection to God most especially. The spiritual crisis is usually temporary, although one St. Paul of the Cross back in the 1800s was said to have gone through it for some 45 years, as he documented it. Another saint that you know well, who documented her own fear, her own anxiety, her own questions at times about the existence of God or the goodness of God, was no one other than Mother Teresa of Calcutta. If you've never studied her writings, you would see that she struggled with a great deal of anxiety and grief, and at times disbelief, perhaps in the face, maybe disenchantment for all that she did for the needs of the poor, and there continued to be poor among her. Pope John Paul II asked, where did Mother Teresa find the strength and the perseverance to place herself completely at the service of others? She found it in prayer and silent contemplation. But she did write this, among many other things she's written to this effect: where is my faith? Even deep down there is nothing but emptiness and darkness. If there be God, please forgive me. When I try to raise my thoughts to heaven, there is so much convicting emptiness that those very thoughts return like sharp knives and hurt my very soul. Which one of us has not struggled with a feeling at times of the absence of God? Or maybe the silence of God? Analyzing her process of canonization, many thought that what she lived in for those some 50 years was a dark night of the soul on steroids. But even that, she continued to do her work, to get up each day and love and care for the poor, and it did not stop her beatification or her canonization. She was beatified, elevated to a place of bliss and veneration back in 2003 by Pope John Paul II, and then in 2016 she was canonized. So even in the midst of her own doubting and confusion, she was still lifted up. It's important for us to hear in the midst of our struggles. No matter how angry we are, how betrayed we feel, that God is still with us. If you want an image of what this place looks like, think of this place, Noah building the ark, people laughing at him and then living on the ark. Think of Moses up on the mountain waiting for the 10 Commandments. Think of Jonah in the metaphorical belly of the whale. Think of Mary and her pregnancy with Jesus. Think of Jesus in the wilderness. Think of Paul in today's setting. And for me, it all looks like this image on the bulletin last week, the chrysalis with a deep black background attached precariously to a stick that appears to be alive. And if you look closely at the picture inside, teeming with translucent color. Only God knows what will emerge and when it will emerge. In 1997, an American journalist and screenwriter and dramatist and radio and TV broadcaster and musician, Mitch Albom, wrote an epic memoir that to this date has sold over 17 million copies in 50 editions around the world. The memoir, you know, was about his sociology professor, Maury Schwartz, whom he rediscovered in the last months of Maury's life. Maury was dying with ALS, and knowing this, Mitch visited him in his study every Tuesday, and out of it came a beautiful book. Their rekindled friendship turned into one final class about life's greatest lessons. You know the book, Tuesdays with Maury. There's so many beautiful little nuggets in this book, not enough time to discuss them. You need to pick up the book. If you don't have it, Amazon can help you. But I want to share with you a little nugget that a group of us took to Kimberly French's house just a week or two before she died. We read from Mitch and Maury's conversation. Think of how this reminds you of good death and good grief. I picked a place to be buried, Maury said. Where is that? Well, not far from here, on a hill beneath a tree overlooking a pond. Very serene, a good place to think. Are you planning on thinking there? No, I'm planning on being dead there. He chuckled, so I chuckled. Will you visit? Visit? Well, just come and talk. Make it Tuesday. We always do things on Tuesday. Right, we're Tuesday people. Come to talk then? He's grown so weak so fast. Look at me, he says. I'm looking. Will you come to my grave to tell me your problems? My problems? Yes, your problems. And you'll give me answers. I'll give you what I can. You don't know always. I picture his grave on a hill overlooking the pond, some little 9-foot piece of earth where they place him, cover him with dirt, put a stone on top, maybe in a few weeks, maybe in a few days. I myself am sitting there alone, staring into space. It won't be the same, I say, not being able to hear you talk. Ah, talk, Maury says. He closes his eyes and smiles. Tell you what, after I'm dead, you talk, and I'll listen. He goes on to talk with Maury about the beauty of life and that death is a natural part of relationship. And one of the things he says to him as he closes in this chapter is, as long as we can love each other and remember the feeling of love we had, we can die without really going away. Because you see, death ends a life, not a relationship. Death ends a life, not a relationship. In this Acts 9 conversion story, we're told that when he was led into Damascus and when Ananias came trembling and laid hands on him, that immediately something like scales fell from his eyes. Wouldn't you wish for immediately that whatever you're dealing with could fall from your eyes and you could be restored? I don't know about you, but I don't know that 3 days is enough time to change somebody who persecuted Christians into our new best friend, minister, and missionary. But at least that's the way Scripture portrays it. You and I have sat through a lot longer times of transition than that, but we'll leave that to the Holy Spirit. When I arrived home Thursday evening, I was still crying. The baby deer, remember? Gary let me process as he always does. I realized I hadn't cried like that so deeply for such a long time. And if we're all wise, we'll sit in that sorrow. We'll sit in that place of confusion and disenchantment and disorientation and unhinging as long as it takes. We don't have to sit there alone. There are plenty of people that will come with you if you'll let them. But I want to challenge us all, don't avoid these places where we need to travel, because some of our deepest and most beautiful work is done in this neutral zone that we often run to get away from. sit with it, live with it, stay with it. So that whatever grief or losses we experience, let us resolve to do them intentionally and well, like Paul and like Maury. Never waste a good crisis. Never. Because something new will ultimately come.